My name is Thomas Schumacher. I am from Berlin and I'm a techno DJ and producer. How would I introduce myself to someone who doesn't know me or my music? That's a good question. I would say that I came into this world with a mission, and God gave me a superpower, and that superpower is that I can create special spaces and places where people meet and connect, and I help them to kind of have very unique experiences, even like out-of-body experiences. And the tool is music, it's techno music. It means everything. It is my form of expressing myself. It is my form of connecting with the audience. It is a constant source of inspiration for myself. And it's as important as eating and breathing for myself. In the mid to late 80s, I was like a teenager. I was still in school. And I just noticed that I was really not only drawn to music, but I was like more like curious. I really wanted to know everything about music, but it was not specific at that point. But once I started to listen, I think it was in 1986, 1987, to music produced electronically, like synth pop music, dark wave music, electronic body music. That's when I realized, okay, there's something here that I have to figure out. And so if you want names, for example, a band like Depeche Mode was very important to me in their early stages. And yeah, so many other like Nitzerab or some industrial bands, you know, and that really got me started to find out like how could I possibly do that myself. And I don't have any musical background, no education whatsoever. But that didn't stop me from, you know, figuring it out. And it was always like this kind of, I want to be able to do this myself. You know, that was just, it's hard to explain, but it's just like this urge to figure this out, you know. And so in 1989, I heard the first acid house records from Detroit, Chicago, from Amsterdam, Berlin. And that was another really important moment, because then something else was added to the mix. I already was so into this whole, like, how can I produce? But then DJing and dance music all of a sudden came into my life. And I guess that was where it was clear for me, you know, this is my direction and this is what I want to do. Artists that really inspired me early in my career and that kind of motivated me to follow through with my own path were Laurent Garnier, an iconic French DJ who was just so ahead of its time in terms of playing the most eclectic DJ sets, going back then from classic Detroit techno to more like banging industrial techno to even drum and bass and bringing it down. Fantastic DJ's DJ. Then there was Carl Cox, who was just, to me, probably the most natural DJ of DJs in a way. You know, he was born to DJ. To see him DJ and give everything, and he was a wizard, like also like easy, like technically very skilled, 4 decks, vinyl DJ, obviously, you know. And his whole way of interacting with the people, he was so up for it always. I felt that was just someone I really looked up to. He was also, in many ways, very helpful for my career, because he started to play my earliest records, and that helped my career. And then I would say probably Jeff Mills as well. You know, I remember in 1991 or 1992, I saw him for the very first time, and his way of DJing, that was insane. That was just something I'd never seen. It was almost like punk in techno. His transitions and his mixing skills, it was so raw and so fast. And then especially the music that he played that was so unpolished, it was like the most powerful kind of techno, and that just left a mark. Over time, in my case, that's 3 decades now, so that's a long time. And naturally, throughout all these years, my music has changed. But I think, I would say by 1998, 1999, so almost a decade into my career, I kind of had found my own style. You know, my handwriting, what a Schumacher track has to have to get my stamp of approval. And since then, I guess it's, for myself, it's mostly about keeping it interesting. I just love music production so much. I spend a lot of time in my studio, and I just need to explore techno more and more and push the boundaries, and at the same time fine-tune my own, style. And so what I find is essential for a Thomas Schumacher track is a high level of energy, a very powerful kind of low end, and then I just love to tell a story within like 6 to 7 minutes. So arrangement is key for me. And I am a classic techno DJ in terms of that I love tracks with breakdowns, a nice cool break and then a fat drop, but still not in a way that is too distracting in a way. I understand as a DJ the importance of also keeping it steady. So, and this is the art form, I think, of production these days. How can you introduce breaks that keep the track, make them really interesting without destroying the flow in a way? So that's something I think I've specialized in. And I think another element that always is key for me is I call it the rave element in my tracks. And that means a certain rawness, a certain style of sounds that I like to use. I still sample a lot. And interestingly these days, like 90s samples are so en vogue again. And that's just something I've always worked with, because in the 90s, obviously, that was the time when the most groundbreaking techno tracks ever were produced, because it was so new, it's just normal. So these are the references that I'm always going back to and using. But then it's also important, I find, to really not just repeat yourself. It's basically, I think what we're seeing these days is a remix of something that has been done before. And what we're also seeing is people remixing even styles now, like psy techno, that didn't even exist a couple of years ago. And I think we will see this more and more. And this is something I'm also looking into with my own productions within certain boundaries. My standard answer is life. It's not one specific thing, but I do get a ton of inspiration from playing to people, playing DJ sets. There's just this interaction, and the way people sometimes just absolutely lose themselves to my music it's very rewarding, but it's also something that kind of triggers areas of my brain where I can tell I'm so full of new ideas already to go back with to my studio. But then, of course, I love movies. I'm a huge fan of watching movies and also of movie soundtracks. And I find that can be also a source of inspiration these days. And then I co-produce a couple of artists these days, and I find working, especially with younger artists, very interesting, because it allows me to get out of my bubble and into a completely different one, and also work on styles that I would probably never try myself for my own productions, and that then inspires me to do my own thing and change things up again. I think this is something that is very typical for myself, is I'm always the first one to change it up. I was never satisfied when I would just repeat the same formula over and over again. And in terms of inspiration, I can say that traveling is also something that inspires me a lot. Just, seeing different cultures, different environments, landscapes, it's just something that I have a feeling just fills my creative tank so much, And I'm a very visual guy. So, for example, I also love architecture. I'm staying here in Vancouver in downtown, and my hotel room is on the 23rd floor. I have an amazing view over downtown and all the buildings around. And interestingly, downtown here is actually really it's pleasing on the eye. It's not ugly at all. It looks almost organic how all these high rises have been built next to each other. The first challenge was information, because when I started, especially production, I didn't have a big budget anyway. I was still a student, but also at that point, we're talking about 1988, 1989, it was just the beginning of technology becoming available for people with smaller, income. Before that, the first samplers, the first synthesizer drum machine, everything was really expensive. It was made for big studios with big budgets. So there were these two challenges. The first one is to find money to buy gear. And once you bought it, to understand how do I even connect it? How do I make this synthesizer speak to this computer? And you have no idea, because, obviously these days it's just information is readily available. Back then it was not available at all. So I remember I had to go to a specific newspaper stand that imported magazines from the UK, audio recording magazines. And so I started to read in there, and then I found out that in my hometown there was a recording studio actually. So after school I just drove there, and I was literally just hanging around outside waiting for people to come out, and then I was just approach them and say, yeah, hi, I'm Thomas, and maybe could you just answer some questions, or could I just take a quick peek? And one guy took pity with me. He was like, should I show you around? Should I show you the studio? And I was like, yes, please. And he became like a mentor to me, and he was so helpful, giving me a leg up, so I was able to basically build my own little home studio back in, my room at my parents' place. And so in the end, in the early days of my career, it took forever. Everything took a long time. But nowadays I also appreciate it, because I learned that it gave me a chance to become really knowledgeable about every detail of my studio. I knew every synthesizer, every sampler, every effect unit super well after a couple of years. And that is in a way helpful, because if you're so limited in your resources, you have to learn to make the most out of it. And now we have the total opposite. You buy yourself a nice new laptop, comes with, often if you buy an Apple, with Logic, is there, costs next to nothing. It's the most powerful DAW ever. Tons of loops, sounds, everything is, at your fingertips, but I think it's overwhelming for newcomers. So for me, it was the opposite. It was making the most with little resources, learning everything from scratch. And in the end, I think I really benefited from that, And the second part is, of course, as far as DJing goes, it was also difficult, because I was there, I had a partner, we were like a DJ team in my hometown, and there were only 2 clubs. And we were into techno, but these clubs were only playing house music, more commercial house. And when we talked to the owners and said, look, would you give it a try? We'd like to, do a techno rave here. They were just laughing at us. They were like, nah, no way. No one wants techno. We were like, wow, we don't think so. So we started to organize our own events. We rented a small venue, and it was a success from the first party, because the people, there was a crowd already there that heard about techno and that was very curious. And so, this DIY thing has always spoken to me. If you face kind of resistance, or if you don't find people who want to support you, do it yourself, and find your own way. And I think that has proven to work very well for me. I think our scene has or is in the middle of undergoing the biggest changes since its invention. And the two main driving factors are social media and mobile phones, which affect everything on all levels. So it's really complex because I think it's not, there's a lot that is very positive that came from, that we are able to, film each other and all this footage and content creation. And same can be said about, clearly about social media. It really helped spreading the word across the globe. And I think if you look at it, if you zoom out and see just the electronic dance music scene from way above, you probably have to say it's never been as popular as now, our music, in all its shapes and forms, from super commercial to super underground. And at the same time, we see problems arising that we never had before. That there are now events where it feels like the core values of what a techno event used to be are completely forgotten. And we also see a new type of DJs, I call them performance DJs, that are more akin to pop stars in the 70s or 80s. They have their following because they are kind of very good at being influencers on social media. So what we're also seeing is all of a sudden things shift. So why do people go to see their favorite artist? Is it the music or is it the person? Is it both? It's all like, it's shifting a lot. And it's also a reality that because techno has become such a global phenomenon, there's a lot of money involved these days. And you have a lot of investors these days who want to make money, which is legit. But with that come a certain set of problems because of social media now. We kind of have like this unofficial ranking in our scene. Follow us. It's like the new currency, and it has in some areas of our industry, it's like a game by numbers, especially the more commercial side of it, big festivals, big indoor events. When you look at the lineups, it's literally like, who's got the most followers, and I don't want to necessarily judge it so much. I think it's first important to just acknowledge it. That's what we're seeing here. And then we need to, I think, ask just questions, And I think what I'm hoping for is that the kids who are going out these days to raves and to parties or to big events, that they educate themselves. Check it all out, If you want to see a massive production, something like, what Taylor Vaz does with massive video screens, go check it out. But I think it's important to understand you're not going to a techno party, you're not going to a rave. It's a completely different thing that you're going to do, which is cool. But I think it's important to know the difference. And I think we just need to hang in now for another couple of years, maybe until this kind of novelty factor of social media stars and influencer DJs wears off, to see where we end up, But at this point, for example, what I'm doing is often, because there's an ongoing huge online debate about what is techno. But the reality is, techno can be so many things. No one has the right to say, I have the definition of techno in terms of music. But I do believe we can all agree there are certain values that come with techno. And I would love for people to understand that. For example, that it's not really techno to go to an event and film yourself or film others just willy-nilly, nor is it for DJs to rock up and have 3 camera teams with them. It's because, the concept of techno always meant like the DJ is just part of the whole event. And he's not the superstar, not, the sole reason for people to come. And it was about people forgetting about life for a moment and just losing themselves in the music. You can't do that if your main reason is to shoot content, And this is, what we're seeing right now. And I think we need to educate people and we need to help them make good choices in a way, And again, I'm not saying one is better or the other. I'm more like saying, just know what you really want. What kind of experience are you looking for? And in that sense, I think it helps to be a bit more critical about what you see on social media, because certain bubbles, certain groups in our scene are really smart in terms of selling their thing, selling a brand, selling an idea. I think the best example was after the pandemic in Europe, this new kind of, we call it TikTok techno, kind of a mix of harder techno, hard style, and it was sold to a very young crowd that probably was their first year that they were like really raving as an underground movement. But it was never, from the get-go, it was a movement that was very overground, very almost EDM-ish, and it still is, you know, and it has become exactly that. It is a very massive commercial movement. The top DJs in that bubble earn tremendous amounts of money. They don't do club events, they only do massive shows, you know, and that is fine. But when people think they're going to an underground movement or event, then that's not true. It's just not like that, you know. That is a big question. There are so many, as you can imagine, right? I mean, I've seen a lot in my life, and I'm very, very thankful for that. And I keep experiencing, you know, insane moments. I was early on fascinated with Japan. I remember my first tour there in 1998, and it was such a culture shock and so fascinating, you know, because Japan is like no other country in many ways. And I had very good friends there. And so I think for the next 2 years, I came back to Japan and I kept playing there. And every time I came home, I was like, oh, I miss Japan already. I want to go back. And then, you know, I realized you could also just move there, mate. Why not? And so I did that. I moved to Tokyo, found an apartment, and I started to play a lot in Japan. And in Japan, I had just the most insane experiences. I was a resident DJ in Tokyo's only after-hour club, Maniac Love, and it had a capacity of maybe 300 people. It was always completely packed. It was the only place where you could see gay people like being openly gay, cross-dressers, the whole thing, you know, this real subculture. And it was just phenomenal to DJ there and to have these moments where you see an entire club completely losing their minds to the music. It was just, it's hard to even describe, to put it into words, but there was so much energy in the room. And then we went on for hours and hours, all Sunday long, and it was just the most epic DJ sets of my life. And really also there was just this like camaraderie amongst it was all regulars anyway there, you know, so we knew each other well. And I remember, I think I introduced them to German alcohol. I imported some bottles myself. We enjoyed that, and yeah, that was just a great time. And I had one experience particularly interesting in Japan. I was playing in a basement club in a city called Sendai, and it was tight. Japanese people just, you know, there's so little space there, so they make do with the most tiny space, you know. So the club was in the basement of a high-rise building. You go downstairs, and before you could even enter, there was the little bar, and there was like you could check your coats there. And then you walk inside this tiny room, there were just speakers in the corners, and the music was just like so loud. It was just really intense. And I was still smoking back then. And I started my DJ set, and after a while I wanted to smoke a cigarette, and I thought my lighter wasn't working. And then I don't know, I just like forgot about it, and I kept DJing, and then I started to feel really dizzy. And so I got a bit like uncomfortable, and I asked a friend to get the promoter, and the promoter came, and I was like, I don't know what's going on with me, you know, I feel lightheaded. And he was like, oh yeah, there's not enough oxygen here in this room often, but we have these O2 bottles at the bar, I get you one. I kid you not. And he came back with it and put it on my face. I was like, and it was the best moment, like pure oxygen, right? It was just the best drug ever. I was just like, yes. You know? But what a story, right? And I was afterwards like, you could have told me before. And they said, we always see how long a DJ lasts, you know? So it was, I never forget that. It was an epic night. The thing is, both are completely connected with each other, and I would never be able to really choose. because it's really like this. It's the perfect combination, to play my own tracks, see the reaction of people, get totally inspired by what I see, what I experience, go back to the studio, start with a new track or fine tune the track that I'm just testing, It's just like, it's the perfect storm for me. So, for example, if I take a break from DJing, which I do usually in January every year, it's not like then I will spend all the time recording tracks, because I kind of need to be on tour and play in front of people to fill my creative tank to record tracks. So that's how it works for me. So in a way, what I've done is, though, I've really quickly made use of, once the first generation of Apple Macs was powerful enough for me to work with that, I switched over, because I knew it would enable me to record while I'm on tour. And because I'm touring so much, that is just, it saves me a lot of time, I still prefer to start new tracks in my studio, but the fine-tuning, arrangement stuff, or versions, I can easily do in a hotel room or even on a longer flight. So yeah, the balance is to keep doing both. This year was a year of change for myself. I had toyed with the idea of producing other artists for quite some time. I always found that interesting, that angle of doing that, because it's so specific and something completely else from producing my own music. So this year I actually got together with two artists, two female artists. One is from Germany, her name is Anna Reusch, and one is from Belgium, her name is Marou. And yeah, we sat down individually and just talked about potential collaborations and kind of visions, what they would want to achieve with their music. And then, we started, and it's been a very successful and rewarding year for all of us, and it's just fascinating for me, to do this and to see how different it is from what I'm doing myself, and to just see also, especially with the Marou from Belgium, like a younger generation and their approach, and how, for example, they do this thing, she does Psy-Techno, like Indira Paganotto, she's part of that label, and how natural it is for them to bring together styles that my generation would certainly not, and to create something really interesting and fresh and new. And I find that is just, it's just cool, It's a new concept that I came up with that I'm gonna showcase in 2025 when I go on tour again. And it has to do with the fact that I've been doing it for so long now. And as I said earlier in one of your questions, or in one of my answers, that the most important and groundbreaking tracks in techno were probably recorded throughout the entire 90s into the 00s. But later on, just naturally became more difficult. You cannot reinvent the wheel, And from then on, it was more like gradual, improvements in sound and stuff. But I guess the 90s were also we're also naive, and people would just experiment so much. And when you experiment a lot, then sometimes really extraordinary things happen, and we've seen that. And I noticed over the years that it was always something during my DJ sets that was important, was to kind of remind people of the heritage of our music scene. And since I see myself as a storyteller DJ, it was just almost natural that I came to a point where I was like, why don't you come up with a concept where you really tell your and the story of techno in a way. It's my personal take on it. But I think it also reflects like a broader angle of like, so which were these really important tracks? And since I did not find it so exciting, the thought of playing the original versions, also because sonically, tracks from the 90s just don't have that power anymore. And since I'm a producer myself, I was like, why don't I just remix all these tracks? So I started to, in iTunes have a playlist last year And whenever I could think of a track that I thought, oh, this is a great one, people should listen to that again, I put it in there. And then I started remixing all these tracks, and I started testing it last year. And the more I started testing these tracks, the more I felt like, oh my God, this is really something that speaks to people. And I think that was the moment when I went for it, was I could tell it spoke to the young generation and old generation. The older ones, of course, who were there when these tracks were originally came out, they were like, oh, great, our anthems. But the younger ones also, they get it, they're like, this is where it comes from, right? And so this concept just came together, and I fine-tuned it, and now I have 3 hours worth of remixes of classic techno, and also some trance tunes and some left field stuff, and I can't wait to showcase it next year when I go on tour again. So I am 52 years old now. So in 10 years, that means I'm 62. My God. I still completely enjoy what I'm doing. I feel like a fish in the water tank every day when I'm in the studio or when I'm on tour DJing. I'm very picky these days, especially when it comes to DJing, or when it comes to collaboration, anything, because I know I've been doing it for so long now that there's always the danger that I guess maybe you burn out or you just get bored because you keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So again, my curiosity totally helps me with that. And I have high standards. So I think by being very conscious about the choices that I'm making, I guarantee myself to keep having fun. And I want to have fun, and I want to continue to interact with people. And for me, it's very important that I speak to especially the youngest people in the crowd, like the next generation. I know it will be always easy for me to connect with my generation or older generations, but I think my job is also to, kind of, I don't see myself as a teacher, but tell stories to the kids, in a way. And so I think in 10 years from now, I will probably play less shows because I will be 62, and I will be even more picky and still completely enjoy it. And I will gradually shift things the older I get to even more time in the studio, more collaborations. I can totally see myself having some kind of, not a music school, but a place where I can teach up and coming producers the magic, the skills of producing music. And I want to share my experience with other people. I think this is really important as well. I noticed through my career that often there were people, how do you call them? Gatekeepers, that made it difficult for me to go up. And I always disliked that immensely because I think it's just so selfish and it's not good for us as a scene. I want the most talented people to rise up and be the new superstars, because the better our music is, the more likely this will continue forever and ever. And that's what I want to see. I want to, and I want to imagine in 500 years from now, people will still listen to techno music. How good would that be, right? So I think we should, as the more veteran artists, be part of that, of helping the next generation forward. My advice to artists that are starting out right now is to take your time. I know, especially when you're young, you're full of energy, and again, these days when you see on social media, what's possible, I know people are excited. They want to be a DJ, they want to be a producer, they want to be a superstar, and that's all fair, but I do believe that you have much better chances if you take your time, if you learn the trade, if you become a really good producer, DJ, social media content creator. It's all part of it these days. This is also a reality, and I know some people struggle with it, but it's better to just accept it, It's just, times are changing and you have to go with the times. But do understand that we say you only have one first chance for a good impression. That first demo that you send out or that first DJ mix that you upload. Take your time with it, because if you kind of do it prematurely, it will be not working in your favor. You know, it's like, look, I get sent tons of demos to listen to for my label every month. I cannot possibly listen to all of them. So sometimes I even just randomly pick, you know, an email from my inbox and then I listen to it. And that is the moment. And I guarantee you, if you took the time and if you figured something out that is really unique, your unique selling point, your statement as an artist, your chances to make it go potentially up. But if you don't take that time, and if, for example, the vast majority of demos that I listen to are kind of technically fine, but from a creative point of view, it's just nothing, I have to say. It's mostly, I can hear the, like the inspiration. Like I can hear, okay, you seem to be a huge fan of Enrico San Giuliano or blah blah or Space 92 or whatever. But that's not good enough, unfortunately. You know, you have to find your own language. And I know it's easy to say for someone like myself who's been in this game for so long, but I also know if you take your time and if you work on yourself and if you find that in yourself, it will be rewarded, you know? So again, I say to people, be patient, take your time to make sure you come out with the best possible version of yourself as an artist, and then you blow people away, and then you have a career in the industry. What I would like to share with people is, in these days and ages where we see so much on social media, is to always be aware that social media is never a true representation of reality. Never, ever. Don't just believe what you see there, and rather find it out yourself. Be curious, go out, find ways to, you know, to create your own reality in terms of what you want to experience, and don't just follow what you see on social media. There you go. Yeah, yeah, you got it.